الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا السراج المنير المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. أما بعد، يقول الله في المحكم بعد نعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. صدق الله العلي العظيم. السلام عليك أيتها المظلومة المغصوبة، السلام عليك أيتها المضطهدة المقهورة، السلام عليك يا فاطمة بنت رسول الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. Peace be upon you, the oppressed lady whose right was usurped. Peace be upon you, O the persecuted, the maltreated one. Peace be upon you, O Fatima, daughter of the Messenger of Allah, and may the mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you. Tonight, of course, we're commemorating the martyrdom of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, the beloved daughter of the Prophet. And these occasions always trigger trigger a urge to reflect on the life of Fatima alayhi salam, and by extension, reflect on the bigger question of the role of women in Islam, the role of women in society in general. And it's a natural desire to reflect on the role of women in society, because as all of you know, Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam was considered the prime role model of women throughout humanity. Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, meaning the exemplar, meaning the highest role model for all of women, but by extension also the prime exemplar for all men, for all Muslims, for all non-Muslims. And so tonight we're going to reflect on the life of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, but we're going to approach it in two major parts. In the first part, just some brief words about the condition of women since the time of the Prophet and in modern times. Then by extension, a reflection on Ali Shari'ati, who, as all of you know, is one of the well-known scholars in contemporary Islamic thought. He's put together a book called Fatima is Fatima. So the second part of tonight's discussion will be a discussion of some of the key points of Ali Shari'ati's book, and trying to link those points to the life of Fatima alayhi salam, and more importantly, trying to link the lessons from the life of Fatima alayhi salam and from the book of Ali Shari'ati to our contemporary situation. So let's begin. Let's start off with the role of women in society and the role of women in Islamic society in particular. And I'll start off with a famous work from Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd in English is known as Averroes. He was a Muslim philosopher. He was primarily an Aristotelian, meaning he was a sort of a follower of the Aristotelian school of thought. He lived in southern Spain, in Cordoba and Sevilla, and he ended up dying in Morocco. And in his book, where he talks about Aristotelian thought and some of the ideas in Platonic thought, Ibn Rushd, over 900 years ago, so this is back in the year 1100 of the contemporary era, wrote this very astute observation about the role of women in society in his own cities of Cordoba and Sevilla. And you know, a lot of the observations that he brought up during that time are still very applicable today. So what was the situation of women during the time of Ibn Rushd? And you can find this in his commentary on Plato's Republic, the first treatise. He says, the competence of women is unknown, However, in these cities, since they are only taken in them for procreation and hence are placed at the service of their husbands and confined to procreation, upbringing, and suckling, this nullifies their other activities. Since women in these cities are not prepared with respect to any of the human virtues, they frequently resemble plants in these cities. There being a burden upon the men in these cities is one of the causes of the poverty of these cities. So there's a lot of verbiage in here. So let's distill the main message of Ibn Rushd. He's observing the role of women in his own society in southern Spain at the time. And he was saying that a society has confined the role of women during his time. We're talking here about the year 1100 or so in southern Spain, in Islamic Cordoba, saying that society has confined women to the roles of being, simply procreation, upbringing, and suckling, meaning the only role that society values for women during the time of Ibn Rushd is their role as mothers and as people who give childbirth. Beyond that, their role is completely unknown, and women in many ways resemble plants, saying that there's really no difference between a plant and a woman in the Islamic society that he was living in. And essentially, society was oppressing women during the time of Ibn Rushd, confining them to these very limited roles that enabled them to, prevented them from fulfilling their maximum potential. So that was the situation during the time of Ibn Rushd over 900 years ago. Fast forward to the year 1971, which is when Ali Shari'ati was still alive, and he started his lectures on the life of Fatima alayhi salam. He started a series of lectures in the year 1971, coinciding with the birth anniversary of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And he wanted to reflect on the role of women in society. Again, as I mentioned, because he was talking about the life of Fatima Zahra, he wanted to link the life of Fatima with the role of women in his own society. This is 1971, Iran. The Shah had just come into power. Shari'ati had come back from France, and he was giving regular lectures at Husseiniya Irshad in Tehran. And this is what Shari'ati observed, and this is all can be found in his book, Fatima is Fatima. He says, in our society, women change rapidly. The tyranny of our times, this is in 1971, and the influences of institutions take her from what she is. All her traditional characteristics and values are taken away from her until they make her into a creature they want, they build, and we see they have built. This is why the most important and relevant question for the awakened women at this time is, who am I? Knowing full well that she cannot remain what she is. What Shari'ati is talking about is very similar to what Ibn Rushd was talking about in the year 1100. He's saying that society is confining women into these very defined roles, and this confinement is limiting the true potential of women. And so he starts off his series of lectures by posing the question, saying that every woman in society should ask, who am I? Am I what society is making me out to be, which is a very traditional role? Am I what contemporary Western society wants me to be, which is this sort of objectified model of womanhood? Or am I pursuing something which is more deep and authentic? And this is where he links this question of who am I with the life of Fatima Zahra. Ali Shari'ati is saying that there was a lot of confusion in society in 1971 Iran. And he's saying this confusion is brought on by the roles, the traditional roles that society is forcing women to be in. So he's saying that every woman living in that society at the time has to ask herself the question, who am I? And so the point that I'm trying to make here with both of these quotes is that a lot of things have not changed since the time of Ibn Rushd. During the time of Ibn Rushd, women were confined to a very limited role in society, primarily as people that give birth to children and take care of children. Fast forward to the time of Ali Shari'ati in 1971, and women were also being limited in their role. So then the question becomes, how do we as a society, enable women to occupy their full potential, their full God-given right to become active members of society, and stop limiting them to something that they want and they build and that they have built. That's the fundamental question that we hope to answer here tonight. What can we learn from the life of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam that'll enable us to create a society that creates opportunities for every member of society, both men and women? And what can we learn from the life of Fatima that'll enable us to prevent the limitation of women to these very specific roles and enable us to expand the role of women, just as the Quran had articulated over 1400 years ago? So to answer this question, first we need to go back to the Quran and reflect on how the Quran reflects on the role of women in society. Did the Quran specify that women were only good for procreation and were at the service of their husbands? Or did the Quran put forward an alternative model for the role of women in society? Well, if you look in the Quran, there are numerous verses that talk about the role of men and women in society. So let's see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Here I give you an example from Surah 9, Ayah 71, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضَهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَيُطِيعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمْهُمُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying the believing men and the believing women, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بَعْضَهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ, are protectors of one another. Here Allah uses the word awliya, meaning someone who's a close companion, a close friend, a close protector, a guardian of one another. They enjoin, and in what way are they protectors of each other? They enjoin what is just and they forbid what is evil. They observe regular prayers and practice regular charity and obey Allah and His Messenger. On them will Allah pour His mercy. أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمْهُمُ اللَّهُ, for Allah is exalted and power wise. Inna Allah azizun hakim. So if you look at the definition of men and women's roles in society according to the Quran, it's very different from the reality on the ground during the time of Ibn Rushd and during the time of Ali Shari'ati, and I would argue even during our current time, where women today are occupying a secondary role in terms of the governance and the organization and the running of society. During the time of the Quran, when the Quran was revealed, it's depicting women as being ideal partners for men. Partners not in committing bad deeds or committing fahsha, partners not in just procreating and producing children, but partners in carrying out the obligations of society. Things like, they enjoin what is good. يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. So if we go back and look at the fundamental definition of gender roles as articulated in the Quran, we see a very clear definition where men and women are depicted as equals and awliya, protectors and guardians, and especially guardians that are protecting the long-term benefit and safety of society. And in fact, there are several examples where women during the time of the Prophet occupied this role as being partners, awliya'u ba'd, where they occupied this role as being protectors of one another and being sort of equals with men in terms of يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ, in terms of enjoining what is just and forbidding what is evil and observing regular prayer and practicing regular charity. I'm going to give you two quick stories about the role of women in early Islam, two important stories that depict, I think, the spirit of this ayah, and then we'll transition into the life of Fatima alayhi salam. These two stories that I'm going to describe for you right now, I think really epitomize and highlight and demonstrate the spirit of this ayah, where Allah is saying that the believing men and the believing women are awliya'u to each other. So this first story took place during the year of the Hijrah. As all of you know, the Hijrah was when the Muslims migrated from Mecca to Medina, and they were fleeing from persecution and injustice in Mecca, and they were fleeing towards Medina so that they could establish a brand new and just and equitable society. So one of the individuals who migrated with the Prophet was a woman named Kulthum bint Uqba. Kulthum converted to Islam against the will of her father, against the will of her brothers. She was unmarried at the time, and she converted to Islam, and she decided to commit the ultimate sacrifice of migrating, leaving her homeland, leaving Mecca, and going to Medina to commit herself and pledge herself to the Muslim community. So what ended up happening is Kulthum bint Uqba migrates to Medina with the Prophet and with the rest of the mu'mineen. Her brothers, who are kuffar, adamant kuffar, fighting the Muslims, they find out that their sister has migrated along with the Prophet. They decide to chase down their sister all the way to Medina. And they go to Medina and they request of the Prophet. They say, "Oh Prophet, our sister Kulthum has migrated here without seeking our permission. So we demand that you give her back to us." The Prophet doesn't know what to do. The Prophet here is, looking for a sign from Allah. And Allah reveals the following ayah from surah number 60, ayah number 10, which is ayatul mumtahina. It says, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, idh ja'akum al-mu'minatu muhajiratin famtahinuhun." O you who believe, if the believing women come to you as migrants, here very specifically talking about Kulthum, if women like Kulthum migrate with you to Medina, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idh ja'akum al-mu'minatu muhajiratin famtahinuhun. So test them. Allahu a'lamu bi-imanihin. Allah knows what's in their hearts. Are they truly believers, or are they simply hypocrites? Are they simply kuffar that are trying to infiltrate the Muslim society in Medina? فَإِنْ عَلَمْتُهُنَّ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ فَلَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ. And when you know, and if you ascertain they are believers, then send them not back to the non-believers. Here Allah is telling the Prophet, "O Prophet, Kulthum has migrated with you. Go ahead and test women like Kulthum. And if they end up being true believers, then don't send them back to their families, to their fathers, to their brothers, to their husbands, all the way back to Mecca. Send them not back to the non-believers. They are not lawful for the non-believers, nor are the non-believers lawful for them. لا هن حل لهم ولا هم يحلون لهن وآتوهم ما أنفقوا ولا جناح عليكم إن تنكحوهن إذ آتيتموهن أجورهن." And the ayah goes on. Point being here that Islam is epitomizing the spirit of the al-mu'minuna ba'dahum awliya'u ba'd, al-mu'minuna wal-mu'minatu ba'dahum awliya'u ba'd, that the believing men and the believing women are awliya to each other. Here we have the example of Kulthum, who migrated all the way to Medina with the Prophet, and despite her brothers coming and requesting that the Prophet hand them back to her, the Prophet, thanks to the injunction from the Quran, refuses to hand back the women to, Kulthum back to her brothers, highlighting here the importance of autonomy and free will and free agency given to women and to men. Prophet could have easily said, "Yes, you know what? You're absolutely correct. You're her brothers. She has no right to make a decision without your permission, and I'm going to hand her back to you." The Quran, however, adamantly rejects that position, says that the believing women, like Kulthum, have a right to make their own decision independent of their male guardians. This is the first example of a type of woman that existed during the time of early Islam that was really epitomized this role beyond being just simply mothers and daughters and what have you, being really at the forefront of protecting and fighting for society. The other incident here is the incident of the pledge of the tree, Bay'at al-Ridwan. This is an important incident. This occurred during the time when the Muslims were now returning back to Mecca to perform the Hajj. So remember, the Prophet only performed Hajj once during his lifetime. He was prevented or blocked from going to Mecca and performing the Hajj during his prophethood. So during the last year of his prophethood, which is called Hajjat al-Wada, the Hajj of farewell, the Prophet was able to work out an agreement with the kuffar to enable him and the Muslims to go to Mecca to perform the Hajj. So this incident of Bay'at al-Ridwan occurred in the last year of the Prophet's prophethood. The Muslims are on their way to Mecca, and they stop outside of Mecca in a small town. And the Prophet sends an emissary to Mecca just to make sure that the situation is still safe and secure for the Muslims to go and perform the Hajj. So the emissary that the Prophet sends to Mecca to talk with the kuffar, he gets delayed in terms of his return to the Muslims. So the Muslims become concerned. The Prophet becomes very concerned that the delegate, the emissary that he sent to the kuffar, has been killed. And if the emissary was killed, this would have been an act of war. So imagine the situation here. The Muslims are on their way to Mecca. They have the intention to perform the Hajj. They send a delegate to talk with the kuffar just to make sure that the coast is clear. The delegate is delayed in terms of returning back to the Muslims, and the Muslims are in a state of anxiety and in a state of panic and fear. They don't know what to do. Are they going to perform the Hajj like they had expected, or is this now an act of war because one of their fellow Muslims has been killed? So the Prophet doesn't really know what's going on, and he asks for all of the Muslims that were with him, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Salman al-Muhammadi, Salman al-Farisi, Fatima al-Zahra, and all of the other companions, Ammar ibn Yasir, etc. He asks all of them to gather under a tree and to pledge their allegiance to the Prophet, so that in case, they have to go to war, they're able to all pledge their oath to the Prophet. So after the pledge was given to the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the following ayah, which is in Surah 48, ayah 18. لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ يُبَايِعُونَكَ تَحْتَ الشَّجَرَةِ فَعَلِمَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِنَّ فَأَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَثَابَهُمْ فَتْحًا قَرِيبًا. So Allah has, given His good pleasure on the believers when they swore fealty to you under the tree, meaning when they pledged their allegiance to you under the tree. He knows well what was in their hearts, and He sent tranquility. The point that I'm trying to make here is that in addition to the men that I mentioned, the male companions of the Prophet, we have several female companions of the Prophet that also pledged their allegiance to the Prophet under the tree. They include women like Rubay'a bint Mu'awwidh and Salma bint Qais, who's also known as al-Mundhir. So again, highlighting here that the believing men and the believing women during the time of the Prophet occupied an equal role when it came to defending the rights and to performing Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. And in fact, it's women like these, like Kulthum, like Rubay'a bint Mu'awwidh, like al-Mundhir, that really represent the spirit of the early women in Islam. They were front and center in terms of fighting with the Prophet. They were front and center in terms of pursuing justice in society. They were front and center in terms of, pursuing haqq and fighting alongside the Prophet and the Imams. They were never second-class citizens, and they never simply occupied the role of people that procreated and gave birth at the expense of their other potentials in society. And in fact, I want to bring your attention to this book by a German Orientalist named Wiebke Walther, who's written a book called Women in Islam, From Medieval to Modern Times. And she talks about the biography of many of these exemplary Muslim women. And she has a beautiful quote in this book. She says, the first century of Islam was characterized by women who were bold and courageous, meaning every woman that you find during that early period of Islam, whether it's Salama, the wife of the Prophet, whether it's Khadija alayhi salam, whether it's Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, whether it's all of these other women, Zainab alayhi salam, all of these women were characterized by being bold and courageous. And in fact, she has an entire chapter dedicated to just women that fought alongside the Prophet in various battles. And here are some of their names: Amara, Hakim, Asma bint Yazid, etc. And in fact, it goes beyond women on the battlefield. In Islam, women occupy a very unique situation with regard to Islamic scholarship. Islam is somewhat unique compared to the other religions like Christianity and Judaism, because we have a lot of female scholars that enabled the transmission of the religion through many centuries. They were either narrators of hadith, they were interpreters of the Quran, or they were scholars by their own right. In fact, I want to bring your attention to this other book by a scholar over at Cambridge University named Muhammad Akram Nadwi. He started a project several years ago where he wanted to compile the names of all of the Muslim scholars in the history of Islam. And he thought maybe he'd have, a handful of women in the history books. Maybe he'd find like a dozen or 24 names of women that were female scholars that were at the forefront of Islamic contemporary thought and scholasticism. And he put together a book called Al-Muhaddithat, the Women Scholars in Islam. What he found, and this is a direct quote from him, he said, I thought I'd find maybe 20 or 30 women scholars, he says. But what he ended up finding is to date, he's found 8,000 of them, women, Muslim women scholars dating back 1,400 years. And his dictionary, he thought he'd have a 1-volume dictionary, now fills 40 volumes. So what I've tried to summarize for you here in the beginning part of the talk tonight is that Ibn Rushd and Ali Shari'ati, although they were separated by about 1,000 years, they confronted the same problem in society, where women occupy a second-class position in terms of their roles and contributions in society. However, if we go back to the time of the Prophet, we find that women were actually at the forefront of being active contributors and active shapers and molders of society. And I think the best example of that is Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. So I've given you the name of all of these women, but the exemplar role model for all of these women is Fatima alayhi salam. That's why the Prophet refers to her as Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, meaning the exemplar or the ideal role model of all of women in Islam. So now in the second part, I want to transition to talking a bit about the life of Fatima Zahra, some of the lessons we can derive from Fatima Zahra, and some of the observations that Ali Shari'ati has made about the life of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam in his book, Fatima is Fatima. Now, all of us know Fatima alayhi salam, Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, as being the mother, as being related to Khadija alayhi salam, the daughter of Khadija, the granddaughter of Abdullah ibn Muttalib, ibn Abdul Muttalib, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the mother of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Al-Muhsin, Zainab, and Kulthum. We know her as being the wife of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But, whenever we talk about Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, we always talk about her in relation to other individuals. We never talk about Fatima Zahra alayhi salam as simply Fatima. And this is something that triggered the following observations from Ali Shari'ati in his book, Fatima is Fatima. He says, when we talk about Fatima, it is most difficult to speak about the personality of Fatima, because Fatima is the woman that Islam wants a woman to be. And then he goes on to say, the concept of her face, her visage, is painted by the Prophet himself. He melted her and made her pure in the fire of difficulties, poverty, resistance, deep understanding, and the wonder of humanity. She is a symbol in all of the various dimensions of being a woman, the symbol of a daughter when facing her father, the symbol of a wife when facing her husband, the symbol of a mother when facing her children, the symbol of a responsible fighting woman when facing her time and the fate of her society. She herself is an imam, a guide, that is an outstanding example of someone to follow, an ideal type of woman, and one who bears witness to any woman who wishes to become herself through her own choice. So remember the conversation that we started at the beginning. In 1971, the role of women in Iranian society was very limited to either fulfilling a very traditional role as the subservient wife, as the mother, as the obedient daughter, and the other role, which was being imported from the West, which is the role of the liberated woman that, is completely independent of her family. So what Ali Shariati is saying is that in the example of Fatima, when we ask the question, who am I? When the woman asks herself, who am I? She reflects on the life of Fatima, because Fatima represents the ideal type of woman in all of these dimensions: the daughter, the wife, the mother, etc. But he says, more importantly, Fatima is an imam. We always talk about the 12 imams. What Ali Shariati is saying is that Fatima by herself, Fatima alayhi salam, should also be considered an imam, because she's a guide. And, this is where I differ with Ali Shariati. He says she's a guide for women. I would say that she's a guide for all of humanity. And Ali Shariati goes on to say that, I wanted to begin in this manner with Fatima, but I got stuck. I wish to say Fatima is the daughter of the great Khadija alayhi salam. I sense it is not Fatima. I wish to say that Fatima is the daughter of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I sensed it is not Fatima. I wish to say that Fatima is the wife of Ali alayhi salam. I sensed it is not Fatima. I wish to say Fatima is the mother of Hassan and Hussein. I sensed it is not Fatima. I wish to say Fatima is the mother of Zainab. I still sensed it is not Fatima. No, these are all true, and none of them are Fatima, because Fatima is Fatima. So what does that mean? It means that whenever we think of Fatima, we always view her in relation to these other relationships. Ali Shariati is saying that, these are all true, but we're doing a disservice if we only view Fatima Zahra alayhi salam as being someone in relation to someone else. Because Fatima alayhi salam is Fatima by herself, meaning she brings enough to the table to serve as that imam, to serve as that role model for both men and women and for all of humanity. So now let's reflect on Fatima as just being Fatima, not in relation to the Prophet or in relation to the Imams or in relation to Khadija alayhi salam. But let's see what does the Quran say about Fatima alayhi salam, and what can we learn about the description of Fatima alayhi salam, both in the Quran and in the Hadith, and what can we take from the description of Fatima and implement in our daily life, taking inspiration from Ali Shariati. There are three main surahs where Fatima alayhi salam is mentioned. Obviously, Surah Al-Kawthar is also one where she's mentioned. Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar fasalli rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. But the three main surahs that highlight the role of Fatima alayhi salam, Ayatul Tathir, Surah Al-Dhikr, and the ayah of Mubahala. So let's take a look at those surahs in more detail. Obviously, all of you know Ayatul Tathir. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Innama yuridu Allahu liyudhiba ankum ar-rijsa ahla al-bayti wa yutahhirakum tathira. Here, the point of this ayah is that Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was included in this verse of purification, meaning it wasn't just the Prophet and Imam Ali alayhi salam and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but it also was inclusive of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Here again, highlighting the role, the importance of women as being awliya, al-mu'minuna wal-mu'minat, ba'dahum awliya'u ba'd. Here, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is being purified so that she can fulfill her role and her optimal potential as being one of those mu'minat, that is the ultimate wali of the Prophet and the Imams and the others. And then in Ayatul Mubahala, all of you know this occurred in the instance when the Prophet was challenged by the Christians of Najran to come and undertake this mubahala, this essentially condemnation, where they come together, they pray, and whoever is in the incorrect camp becomes cursed by God. So in this ayah of mubahala, the Christian monks bring only their representative or their fellow monks, their fellow clergy. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ brings Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. So a major contrast in terms of how women are viewed in the Christian thought during that time and in the Muslim thought. The Christians came simply with their fellow male clergy, whereas the Prophet ﷺ intentionally brought along his daughter, Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Man hajaka fihi min ba'di ma ja'aka min al-ilmi faqul ta'alu nad'u abna'ana wa abna'akum wa nisa'ana wa nisa'akum." So here, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is representative of the entirety of the female gender in terms of the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَنِسَاءَنَا وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ ثُمَّ نَبْتَهِلْ فَنَجْعَلْ لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. And the final ayah that was revealed on behalf of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. There are many ayahs, many other ayahs, but I think what I want to emphasize here is the way that Fatima Zahra is depicted here. She's not depicted as simply being the mother of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhim salam or Zainab alayhi salam. She's not depicted as being someone who simply procreates and takes care of the house, but she's being depicted as being an equal of the Prophet, as being an equal of Imam Ali alayhi salam, of being an equal of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, occupying a preeminent role at the front of the line and not just simply a secondary token individual that's representative of the female gender for all of humanity. And here the final ayah talking about the Quran, on behalf of Fatima alayhi salam, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. Here, as all of you know, this ayah in Surah Al-Insan was revealed on behalf of Fatima alayhi salam and Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein when they had the poor person, the orphan, and the captive. They came to their doors on 3 consecutive nights, and Fatima alayhi salam and Imam Ali alayhi salam, gave of the entirety of their food and their drink to, fulfill the hunger of the poor person, the orphan, and the captive. The point here being, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever he describes Fatima Zahra alayhi salam in the Quran, he always describes her in a way where she is, fulfilling Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar alongside Imam Ali, alongside the Prophet, alongside Imam Hassan and Hussein. And it's a shame, one of the great tragedies in modern times is that we objectify Fatima Zahra alayhi salam and we minimize her role in terms of the development of Islam. Some of the literature that, if you go back to the hadith literature and some of our among some of our scholars, if you look at some of the sermons that are given, people emphasize the purity of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, which is a very important point, but they describe her as being the only woman in the history of humanity that never menstruated. And when I hear these types of discussions, I'm stunned. Fatima Zahra alayhi salam wasn't chosen as Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen because she didn't menstruate, which is a very silly discussion on its own right. But she was chosen as Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen because she was pure in her intentions. She was pure in her actions. She was pure in the way that she achieved and followed and stood by the side of the Prophet and the Imams. She wasn't Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen because she never menstruated, or she's, a tahira, meaning she's so pure because, she never underwent menses, which is just a very trivial, conversation. Or what we find oftentimes today when people talk about Fatima is they talk about her simply as being an oppressed individual, that, Fedek was taken from her, her ribs were crushed, and she spent the entirety of her last days crying. No, dear brothers and sisters, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is an important role model because she was a wali of the Prophet. She was a wali of the Imams. She was a companion and a guardian and a partner to the Imams and the Prophets in terms of fulfilling the obligations of social justice and fulfilling the obligations of humanity in Islam. That's why if we go back to Ali Shari'ati, it says, no, these are all true, and none of them are Fatima. Fatima is Fatima. Fatima is an individual on her own that made significant contributions to the life of Islam and to the development of Islam, and should be evaluated in her own right and not in relation to other male figures. And this is confirmed by the Prophet as well, as all of you know. Prophet on behalf of Fatima, Fatima Sayyidatun Nisa al-Alameen, as we mentioned, Fatima is the heavenly princess of the female gender. Fatima bid'atun minni, man adaha faqad adani, wa man ahabbaha faqad ahabbani. Fatima is a portion of me. She's not inferior to me. She's an equal to me as the Prophet. Whoever pleases her will have pleased me, meaning the pleasure of the Prophet is equivalent to the pleasure of Fatima. And the anger of the Prophet is equivalent to the anger of Fatima alayhi salam. He doesn't depict her as being a secondary, importance, nor does he depict her as being this weak individual who's just, sitting by the side and crying all the time and just, complaining and saying, they took FedEx away from me, or they, did this or they did that. He depicts her as a very strong-willed individual. And Fatima Ummi Abiha, Fatima is the mother of her father. So in this short discussion here, what I hope you take away is that during the time of Ibn Rushd and Ali Shari'at, and even today, oftentimes society tries to narrow the role of women to fulfill a very traditional role. And unfortunately, this limitation of women has extended to the limitation of our understanding of Fatima. We don't understand Fatima alayhi salam as a complete individual, but we only take bits and pieces of her life and we objectify those aspects of her life at the expense of taking a more holistic understanding of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Fatima alayhi salam is not simply the mother of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. She's more than that. She's not simply the daughter of the Prophet. She's more than that. She's not simply the wife of Imam Ali alayhi salam. She's more than that. In fact, she epitomizes what a woman should be, and more importantly, her role at the front of the Muslim community is also a model that we should be pursuing as people that are creating, Muslim organizations in America and beyond. Fatima was at the front of the development of Islam. Likewise, the women in our own communities should be at the front of the development of the Muslim community, whether it's the organizations we build or the way we educate or the opportunities that we give them. So that, as Ibn Rushd said, they're not simply plants in a society. But unfortunately, if you look at the current situation in the Muslim world, what we find is that women aren't necessarily being given the same exact opportunities as men, or they're not being allowed to fulfill their full potential. So here, this is a study from the Pew Research Center in 2016, looking at religion and education around the world. And what they did here is they wanted to look at the educational attainment for men and women, and they ranked if women trailed men or if women led men. So the main takeaway here is in all of the societies that they looked at, whether it's the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, North America, men in all of societies are faring better than women in terms of educational attainment. So the global average worldwide for both Muslims and non-Muslims is that women trail men by 1.5 years for the Muslims and 1.0 years for non-Muslims. And this includes North America and Europe. So women in general are getting the short end of the stick in society in terms of educational opportunities. But if you break it down specifically to the Muslim majority nations in the Middle East and North Africa, you find that women trail men significantly more than the other countries. 2.0 years Muslim women are behind Muslim men compared to non-Muslims. Now, why is this important? Well, women are really the first school of society. So when we reflect on the life of Fatimeh Zahra alayhi salam, the first role that she fulfilled was as the teacher of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Imam Hussein, and Zainab alayhi salam. And she would get this knowledge from the Prophet. So whatever knowledge she would obtain from the Prophet, she would then transmit that to her children, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and Fatimeh Zahra and Zainab alayhi salam. Now imagine the situation. If Fatima had not been given access to the knowledge of the Prophet, would she have been able to raise shining examples like Zainab, Imam Hassan, and Imam Hussein? Or would she not have been able to do that? The point being that if we don't give opportunities to Muslim women, then the subsequent generations are going to suffer. If you want to raise your children to be like Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein and Zainab alayhim salam, first and foremost, work on enabling and empowering your spouse, your wife, your daughter, your mother to fulfill their maximum educational potential. Because if they are able to fulfill that potential, then that'll be transmitted to the subsequent generations. Now, more disturbing than educational attainment is if we look at the role of women in the masjid today. This was from a study from CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and there was a symposium in Philadelphia called Muslim Women in Sacred Spaces Symposium. February 6, 2016, they held this at Villanova University. They conducted a survey of masajid all over the United States, and they found that in the United States, and this is Muslims conducting this, so this isn't like some sort of, secret, organization, anti-Muslim organization that's conducting this. This was a study conducted by Muslims for Muslims, and these are the findings of the study that was conducted for masajid in the United States. They found that 18% of women attend masjids on a regular basis. Over 2/3 of the masjids use dividers between men and women, and only 13% of the masjids allow female participation on boards. So what we're creating here is an environment where women aren't participating in the forefront of running the organizations and being voices in the community. We're giving them second-class status. But if we look at the life of Fatima alayhi salam, and if we reflect at the way that Fatima really was a leader in the Muslim community, that's really the ultimate model that we need to go after. And so, why am I talking about this during the nights of Fatemieh? Because, we could talk about the life of Fatima alayhi salam. But if we talk about the life of Fatima and we simply learn that we should cry for the oppression that she underwent, but then we oppress our own women in our own society, what have we truly learned from the life of Fatima? If we simply cry for Fatima because the oppressors crushed her ribs and really took her life at a very young age, but by extension, we aren't giving opportunities to the women in our own society to take leadership positions, to take educational positions. What have we truly learned from the life of Fatima? So, the discussion here tonight is just to reflect on, the situation during the time of Ibn Rushd and Ali Shari'ati. Women occupied second-class status in Muslim society, despite the fact that the Quran and the example of the Prophet gave them first-class status. I think in many ways, the situation that was described by Ibn Rushd, still the same situation today. If you look at these statistics, not much has changed. If you look at these statistics in terms of the opportunities that Muslim women are being given in Muslim countries, they're really minimal. But if we use Fatima alayhi salam as the exemplar, as the role model for what women in society should be able to attain, then I can guarantee you, then we will truly fulfill the spirit of the message of Islam and truly fulfill the legacy of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Fatima alayhi salam doesn't want your tears. What she wants is, your participation and your emulation of her example in your daily life? Are you taking care of your parents? Are you taking care of the miskin, the yatim, and the yasir? Are you taking care to confront the injustices in society? If so, then you can truly say that you're following the example of Fatima. If you're simply gathering during the days of Fatemieh and crying over the injustice that occurred against Fatima, then you walk out not implementing the example of her life, then you truly haven't learned anything from Fatima. And that was really the main takeaway from Ali Shariati's book, Fatima's Fatima. We could spend much more time. Time is limited here tonight. But, I'll conclude with this sending salutations on Fatima. Assalamu alayka ayyatuha al-mazluma al-maghsuba. Assalamu alayki ayyatuha al-muftahida al-maqhura. Assalamu alayki ya Fatimatu binti Rasulillah wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you, O the oppressed lady whose right was usurped. Peace be upon you, O the persecuted, the maltreated one. Peace be upon you, O Fatima, daughter of the Messenger of Allah, and may the mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to inspire us with the example of Fatima, both the believing men and the believing women, to live our lives like the life of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, who despite all of the difficulties and the adversities and the struggles, was able to maintain her identity and her commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us more like Fatima in this coming new year, the year 2021, to make us all adherents of our Imam, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. صلوات الله.